I want you to please welcome to the stage Danielle McGuire, Crystal Feimster, Cynthia Erivo, Robert Corbitt, and Nancy Buirski. Nancy, did this film for you begin as something of an outgrowth from the Loving Story?
Yes, in a way it did. I had been exploring another film about race, and for one reason or another that fell through. There was no question. I mean, I'm interested in the subject. I think race is our American story, and though I had detoured with Afternoon of a Fawn and by Sidney Lumet, I was ripe for doing another story in that space. And then someone handed me Danielle's book, and I had not seen it before. I read it, and I was knocked out by it, and knocked out by the first 3 chapters that dealt with Recy Taylor. And it was very clear to me that was the film I needed to make.
And very clear to you that it was the film that you needed to make because it was the untold story of very clear that it was the film that you needed to make because it was an untold story in the civil rights movement.
Yes, very, very much so. I consider it a hidden story, and in some ways there's a similarity to the Loving story in that both Mildred Loving and Recy Taylor are reluctant heroes. They're very noble, and they are forced into a situation to do something extremely courageous, and very few people knew about either one of them. So, it was while I was in the middle of making the film that I realized these threads were connected, and I think there are a lot of stories out there. Not to say anything about someone like Rosa Parks, who has a certain kind of story around her, who is mythologized, and her story, in a way, has been hidden for a long time as well.
Yeah, the story that you tell is much deeper than that, than the one that most people commonly know. I want to open it up to questions from the audience right away, because I think people will probably have a lot of questions. Yes.
Thank you for a great film and a great story. I know there's a lot of hidden stories about these sort of things, but I wanted to ask you, have you ever read the book The Invisible Man, and did that have any kind of backing on you in thinking about this film? Because there's a lot of things in regards to the film that shows people overlooking people as not being people, you know.
That's really a wonderful observation. I have read it a long time ago, and I really appreciate your mentioning that, because I think it's one of the many books that we should go back to over and over again. Thank you.
I just want to say thank you so much for making this incredible film and telling the story. I did not know about this, and it just makes me want to read more about her history and as well as Rosa Parks. But I'm just curious to know, how did you approach the contacting the local historian in Alabama and in the families of the people that assaulted Recy Taylor? How did you approach getting their family members or just people surrounding this story on the white side of it to agree and be, I guess, truthful in the storytelling, because that's also important to this?
Well, I appreciate that it did seem like a very unusual thing to do. Beth Hubbard is in this audience. Where is she? She was a producer who actually helped us arrange these interviews in Alabama, and it was very important to us to give a sense of the reality of what that world was like. And without us actually commenting or passing judgment, letting people speak for themselves, I think gives us a really strong reality. And, you know, there's some of it still exists today. I don't think any of us are surprised. Look who just got elected in that state. So I think it's important for us to see that. I think this film is as much a story about a town as it is about a number of the people in the town. I think to understand the climate there and the climate that still exists to a certain extent is really part of our challenge.
Thank you, Nancy. I so related to what you said about where's the humanity. Curious that a state would apologize, and curious not just for Alabama's sake, but maybe for the entire national legal system. How do we really reconcile acts like this? An apology seems quite lovely, but it seems like it asks for a lot more. And very moving film, Nancy, thank you.
That's a question for Danielle. Yeah.
Danielle or
So the apology really came about because of a grassroots effort. There was an article, I think in 2011, about Recy Taylor's story, and a local woman read it in New York. And I think Recy Taylor said in the article that all she ever really wanted was an apology. And this young woman read about it, and she went online to change.org, and she asked the state of Alabama to apologize to Recy Taylor. And it got something like 20,000 likes or something. But every time you liked that petition, it sent an email to the state legislators. So as you can imagine, they're not used to getting 20,000 emails, particularly about a historic case. And they were overwhelmed with, again, sort of outside pressure. And there was an AP story and some other work. And so just like in 1944, on some level, there was, sunlight on this case. And I think the state legislators, which was led by a local Abbeville legislator, decided to make this apology. But they were also very clear that there were limits to this apology, that those limits included not having any kind of responsibility for what had happened, that it didn't include reparations. And so it was a very limited kind of act. And in that sense, I think it's incomplete. There's still no justice in this case. I'm not sure at this point what justice would look like. I think an apology is a beginning, an acknowledgement. The state for the very first time had to acknowledge that what they had done was wrong and that they were sorry for it. They had to recognize her humanity. They had to call her name. That's important. And so I think that it's interesting how these things happen, but there's still not a fully loaded cost accounting, as Nell Painter, the historian, would put it. And we need that still.
Yeah, can I just say something about the humanity and that the struggle with that, and I think that one of the things that Recy did was always maintain her humanity and her dignity as a mother, as a sister, as a daughter, right? But I also think that there is the work that we do, and when I say we do it at many different levels. But for me as a scholar who works in the field and works on race and racial and sexual violence, that doing that deep work and showing these people as not just victims, right? So the dark end of the street does that work, right? It gives us humanity. It brings humanity to Recy and her story, right? And then Nancy picks it up and she sees this as a story that has to be told, right? And she makes this beautiful film, right? That humanizes this story at every level, right? So not just, that we have this young black woman who's brutally assaulted, but we have these young white boys who believe that they have the right to behave in a certain way. That is part of a long tradition, right? A long tradition in the South that is not just about a bad apple, about, these are these particular white boys. But this is a part of the human drama of the South and how white supremacy, racial and sexual violence functions, right? And we can use those terms, but it requires artists and historians and family members to come out and give voice to these stories and remind us that there are people who are behaving badly, right? And that we have to voice those wrongs in order to make them right.
Yeah, great film, Nancy. I wanted to ask Professor Feimster in particular, where you got very personal and you said you were very moved, how you can study this, and to create the thread of how it affects black women today, how they're still sort of playing that role, how you feel that it personally affects you in that way. I'm a journalist that works in that space of politics, culture, and race, and it strikes me how often some of the feedback I get, sometimes it's negative, talks about rape and lynching, even today. And also Nancy, as a white woman, and Danielle, how you feel that white women have to get into that space to kind of understand that this is a very particular challenge and obstacle that black women face today that can cause you, a scholar, to tear up because you probably deal with that personally as well as in a scholarly way.
I mean, I think that it's an important question. I think it's a hard one to answer in the sense that, you know, I always tell my students we have to constantly be thinking about our positionality, who we are, what our relationship is to the work, right? For me, I'm a black woman who is Southern and who, as a college student, was involved in anti-rape work, right? And not necessarily thinking in terms of this is the work that I need to do as a black woman, but at the time thinking this is the work that I need to do as a feminist who understands, as I say in the film, that rape doesn't discriminate, right? But the way that we respond to victims of rape, right? We can see patterns. We can see that it's much harder for black women to receive justice. We also know it's very hard for poor white women to receive justice, for prostitutes, that status and positionality matter, right? And as someone who works in the field of African American studies, women's studies, Southern history, I come at this question at a lot of angles, right? So I, you know, as someone who works, I'm interested in black and white women in the South who are victims of sexual assault, right? And that we can't understand those narratives separate from one another, right? So just as it's important for me as a black woman to do this work, I think it's important for white women to do this work, right? If I think about my work on anti-lynching, right, that I worked on Ida B. Wells, but I also was very much interested in Jessie Daniel Ames, who organized Southern white women against lynching to speak out against the narrative or the myth of rape, of the black male rapist, right? So that there are these intersections and that we all have a role to play in doing this work. And I would not want to be the black woman always speaking about the injustices that black women suffer, right? Because everybody has something to say about that. That Danielle has written a brilliant book that is powerful and moving. And she's a white woman. Nancy has created a brilliant film, right, that gives voice to Recy's story, right? They both come to their work from their own positionality, right? But both Danielle and I are scholars. We've been trained as historians, so we have some kind of guidelines and rules. At least that's what I tell my graduate students. It's not just all my opinion. But like, we've been trained. In some ways, we're cut from the same cloth in terms of like doing the intellectual work. And we are part of a community of scholars, of feminists, of women's historians who are doing this work and that are in conversation with each other, that we learn from one another. So I don't know if that answers your question, but of course, you know, when I went to Venice and I met Robert for the first time, there was something I felt like, this is my people. These are like my black people, my Southern people. And there was something powerful to that like, I can't speak to it as a scholar, but I can speak to it as a black woman who like can connect with Robert and relate to his fierce defense of his sister. And that's real and is what it is.
I wondering if we could shift to the family perspective on seeing this film and participating in it, and what that experience is like, seeing the finished product on a big screen.
How did you feel?
Well, about the big screen, I feel very happy about it. And Nancy done a very good job, and it all come about by certain things that happened in our lives, you know. And in the book that Danielle wrote, a lot of things that was my sister was accused of was told a lie, and then Nancy brought it out very nicely on the screen. I don't know if you noticed, Larry Smith, our historian of that area down there, he was right away accusing the book. And I hear before then they was accusing I know for a fact they was accusing my sister, but I never heard anybody say that those 7 boys were responsible for anything that they had done. It was my sister responsible for herself getting raped. Then it became the book causing the trouble. Then it became, it might even be this movie that's causing trouble, just waiting for that to happen. But you know, around Abbeville, they didn't come to like me too much because I was kind of nosing into everything, and they accused me of stirring up trouble. I never done that. But I just wanted justice for my sister because I watched her hurt for many years. And Recy, she wouldn't talk to anybody about her rape. She only talked to me. And she was very quiet about it otherwise, and I would try to do things to get something done about it. And I never could really get anything from the courthouse or any public material because the courthouse is swept clean. And Montgomery was swept clean, and we thank God for Danielle McGuire that knowed exactly where to get the material for. And I don't know if you want to talk about that, do you, Danielle? No.
You did a good job.
Thank you.
Well, I'll just say that I met Recy and Robert and the whole family the day that Barack Obama was inaugurated in 2008. And I went there with my family, and I brought them a box of everything that I had found about her case. And it was really important, I think, because they weren't able to find anything. And Robert had searched really his whole life. And the documents that I brought back, you know, the town, those young men, the historian in Alabama, you know, they had all tried to disappear this history. They had tried to erase it. And that erasure, you know, is another kind of terror, is another kind of injustice. And so the document sort of, you know, brought that back and said, of course what happened to you is real and no one else can erase it. And I think this film adds a layer to that. Like, no one can take this away anymore.
I actually had a question for Cynthia. I don't know how many people, many of you know that Cynthia, up until recently, was starring in The Color Purple. She played Sally in that, won a Tony Award for it. And she is about to star in a film on Harriet Tubman. So I just wondered how you feel, Cynthia, thinking about these kinds of stories and being able to explore them in this fictional space that you've been in. What does that do in terms of your understanding of the reality of these stories and how you can contribute as an actor?
I guess that I feel like my job as an actor is to be able to tell the stories that people otherwise wouldn't get to see or otherwise get to know about. Whether it be Celie or whether it be Harriet, there are things that we don't know about these people that get hidden or swept under the rug, and I get the opportunity to put them out for people to see so that they can't be hidden anymore. Like you're saying that, you know, this can't be taken away once it's put on stage or once it's put on a film. it can't be erased because it's written down forever. So the idea that I was able to be even a small part of this means a lot to me, because once I knew that Nancy was doing it, I wanted this to be told. I wanted her story to be seen. And actually, funny enough, I don't know if I told you this, I was in DC doing something with the Kennedy Center, and I had the opportunity to go to the African American Museum. And as we were walking through, there is a section on Recy Taylor. And I think I'd only just met you, and just out of the blue, this small article on her and this picture of her with her husband and her daughter. It's in this glass case with the article about it, and I just was completely overwhelmed, because you know when you get that sign that something is absolutely meant to be told and everyone needs to know about it, and everyone needs to know about her and her plight and how she fought and how strong she was and how much of herself she put on the line for people to know what was going on. That was a moment that was like a light bulb, and I knew that whichever way I was going to be a part of this, I was going to be a part of this. I feel like my I guess raison d'etre as an actress is to tell the stories that people find difficult to hear or see. That might sometimes get me into trouble, but that's my job, I guess. I feel like I have the great privilege of being a voice for those people that don't have one. So whenever I can, that's what I'm going to be doing.
It was an excellent film, and I just wanted to ask about the impact that the story has had recently on this community, because it's not everywhere that you have a book that raises such a troubling case and high profile, that you have a apology from the state legislature, and now you have a documentary. So I just want to ask about the impact on the community, the living relatives of Recy Taylor, and Recy Taylor herself. What's been the impact that this story is coming to the national headline in such a big way?
Were you
I guess
referring to the book? Or the
Well, to the apology, to the book, and to the film.
Well, Danielle, I think you can answer that.
The apology was somewhat addressed a little bit earlier in the fact that it only went so far, but the book.
Well, I wonder if that's a question for you and for your family, because the impact is probably most felt.
High impact.
Yeah.
Well, I tell you, I didn't have a normal childhood like most kids did. And after my sister raped in 1943, my father made sure that we play, me and my sister Alma, that you saw in the film there, play just behind the house while he sat on the front porch with his shotgun. He kept that near him all the time. And I didn't have the opportunity to go out into the ballparks and play with other kids. We were more or less isolated because the threats were coming just about every day. And the police, Louis Corbitt, he would always come by the house and tell us that the white people threatened to kill the family and so forth and everything. But I learned better as the years went by. It wasn't so many of the residents that was making those threats. It was Louis Corbitt. And I know if you remember, I think it was
You put the mic close so they can't hear you.
I don't know if you noticed that Luther Lee's brother said that Louis Corbitt was the sweetest man. But I know a different Louis Corbitt.
Right.
And then not only that, I was doing some, I don't know if Danielle saw it, I believe I gave it to Nancy. Well, Louis Corbitt turned a black man out of jail in 1934 in Henry County to be lynched by a mob. And it was lynched not very far from our house. This was Louis Corbitt. That's the Louis Corbitt I know. He was the man that I knew that beat up people's black people's every Saturday uptown if they got drunk or disorderly or something like that. He would beat them up very badly. That's the type of man that I know as Louis Corbitt. And the next thing, this whole thing right on until I left Abbeville when I was 21 years old, there was threats still against the family. And I was away for 43 years, and I went back, and at that time I started trying to find something on my sister. Thank God for Danielle McGuire, because I was looking for some material. I couldn't find anything, any public material. Yes, ma'am, thank you. I couldn't find anything from the investigation or anything like that. We wasn't allowed to know anything about it. And I think Danielle McGuire got it and passed it on to Nancy, and think that Nancy got the whole world knowing it. Yeah. Thank you. Thank you, Nancy.
Thank you, Robert.
Yes.
I'd just like to ask if the family ever considered bringing a civil suit, especially after the legislature made the apology.
Did the family consider bringing a civil suit?
Well, we did. And there was maybe I shouldn't even talk about it now because
it might be it's being considered
right,
possibly?
Right now. It's not over until it's over.
Right. Okay.
Yeah.
Hi, Crystal. Hi, Danielle. My question is for Mr. Robert and for Nancy. I'm curious, the generation after, the children of these persons and the extended family of these persons, have they attempted to engage in a conciliatory manner? Has there been any conversation across generational lines about what happened and possibly, for lack of a better word, healing the situation? It seems that the older generation that was presented in the documentary is still in denial. And for many reasons, we can understand that they are products of their time period and their environment. However, on some level, we would like to believe that the next generation, or even the more immediate generation, may have some different ideas or different interactions. As Mr. Robert is still in that circle, I'm particularly interested in hearing his perceptions on that. Thank you.
Well, I never knew any of the kids of their families, and I'm not sure it ever had kids. I know 4 of the people that didn't have any kids, and it's I have a little something. I be worried about having them to swim in the same muddy water that I swam in. We swam in so many years. So I just don't know if they had kids, those guys. But I kept an eye on them, 4 of them. 4 of those guys I made sure, and these 3 guys, I think his name was Robert Gamma and Dillion York. And those are 2 I never knew what happened to. But we was told by the police that they was killed in a car accident and 1 was killed in a house. But I think when Hannah, Nancy investigator, got behind that, they come to find out that one of those guys died in 2010 in another state. And we was told that they was dead 30 years ago. So they were still covering that thing up.
Nancy, this was also a question for you.
Well, I don't know of any efforts at reconciliation at this stage, but I certainly hope this film might have that kind of impact. you know, it's very hard not to experience the humanity of everybody in Robert Corbitt's family, and particularly Recy Taylor. And I think these films are about empathy. And one would hope that the future generations, or younger people who may be related, or just who live in the town, will feel some responsibility and want to try to do something that will heal this awful wound.
So one more, yes.
Hi. I'd like to ask, your sister and your family did something that was so courageous and so dangerous. And if it's all right, I'd like to ask or know a little bit more about how your family was able to protect yourselves in such a dangerous situation, if it's all right to bring that up.
I think the one thing that happened with Rosa Parks, you know, Rosa Parks took this case quickly and very willingly, because Rosa Parks' childhood home is in my hometown, Abbeville. And also Rosa Parks, her father built this first black high school in Henry County, Alabama. And I graduated from that school. It calls Henry County Training School. But now what was your the other part of the question?
How was the family able to protect itself? How did you protect yourself?
Oh, right. Now that was a good thing. Now what happened while I was getting to it, I kind of lost my thoughts there. Rosa Parks, right away this thing got out nationwide, then it got out worldwide. And the people around Abbeville got frightened, especially the police, because it was known all over the world. And I think that was the biggest protection we had right there. And my father, he kept us very close. I think I lost a lot of my childhood by hiding from these people that threatened to kill us. And I think that was probably the one thing that the people was afraid of, because it was known all over the world. I was in Germany. Some people came up to me and asked me about Recy Taylor. They knew I was from Alabama. And so I think that was one thing that protected us during the year. By the media knowing about it, and it got all over the world.
I want to thank you all for coming tonight. Thank you for this incredible film, Nancy.
Thank you. Thank you, Ken. Thank you for having us.